And check it out. I have a new microphone thing. I've heard all of your comments and complaints about the popping and whatnot, and I'm trying to figure it out. So I have this kind of filter or shield, and I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments how it sounds, and I look forward to seeing it. But so today, what I want to talk to you about is the Battle of Yarmuk, which the final day of the battle occurs tomorrow, August 20th. But we're talking about it today. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to ask my friend who's helping me if he can nod. Can you hear me? Is everything okay? Is it working? Or anyone can comment and let me know if this is working. But let's see. Okay, great. I think it's working and I haven't botched it again. All right. Okay, so the Battle of Yarmuk, let's talk a little bit about it. It's one of the most important things, one of the most important battles for two reasons. It actually had a massive consequential impact on the entire world. And some historians actually say it's the most consequential battle, which I will actually give you the full quote. But it also played a consequential role in my career from over 25 years ago. And so we'll get into that. And it probably makes more sense for me to mention that first. So come back with me now about a quarter of a century when the Ray was at college, California State University of Fresno, being a history major. This is my early 20s, or maybe mid or early 20s. And it's my master's. I'm in the MA program. And I'm very fond of military history and ancient and medieval history. I've never liked pre-modern history, and we'll get into it. And I even like current events less, but we'll get into that. Anyway, oh, thank you. I see comments. Oh, look at this. How quaint. Well, thank you all. You've assured me that you can hear me. I thought I was just talking to myself. All right, great. So anyway, I'm in college. I like military history. And I like medieval, ancient, et cetera, et cetera. And then lo and behold, there's this professor there who's kind of a rising star, and his name is Victor Davis Hanson. And if you know Victor Davis Hanson now, he's like everywhere, and everybody knows him. And he's this massive political pundit who writes and talks about everything, and he has this encyclopedic knowledge. When I met him over a quarter of a century ago, he was the famous guy on campus, the professor, and he had written several well-received books. But what he was a military historian. That's what he was known for, and that's the classes that he was teaching. And I took many of those classes. And you can almost say that was my focus, military history, with him. So I took numerous classes with him, and eventually, we became good friends, mentor really. But he's a very friendly, good guy. And then my master's degree came. It was time to my MA thesis. I'm sorry. He was also the chair of my MA thesis. And when that time came, and this is now around 2000, 2001, and I have to determine a topic. And as I just told you, I like military history. I like the medieval era. And also when you're getting an MA, you have to study 1 or 2 foreign languages. And my 2 languages that I had been studying were Arabic and Greek. And so I gravitated to the nexus of early Islam and Christendom and the battles between Byzantium, Eastern Roman Empire, and Islam, right from the get-go. And I did a lot of, analyzing to see what would be the best theme or idea. And I decided, well, let's look at the most cataclysmic or important conflict battle between Byzantium and Islam. And after some researching, I determined it was the Battle of Yarmuk, which we're going to talk about. So that became my MA thesis. And there was nothing really out there specifically about it that I could find. Mind you, this is the days kind of before the internet. I mean, the internet was around, but I was still going to a library and going through card catalogs and, that sort of thing. So it wasn't that easy to get access to books or information, not the way it is now. But anyway, that became my MA thesis, and I started researching it and writing it, and here it is, by the way, just to show you if you're familiar. So here's my MA thesis. I don't know if you can read it. Ibrahim, the Battle of Yarmuk, an assessment of the immediate factors behind the Islamic conquests. And this came out finally in 2002. And just so you know, you can get a copy on Amazon. Very inexpensive. I think it's like $10, $12, and I don't even get much of it. Amazon absorbs all of it, but I wanted to make a copy available so you can check it out there. But what was interesting, the dual impact of the Battle of Yarmuk and why it was so interesting. And by the way, I look forward to looking at and answering as many of the questions that we get later once I'm done. Again, this is all new to me, so bear with me. Okay. In the midst of my researching and writing the Battle of Yarmuk around 2000, 2001, guess what happened? 9/11, September 11, 2001. The Islamic Al-Qaeda terrorist strikes New York, etc. And at that time, you have to understand, then and now, I was never really interested in contemporary affairs, and I'll eventually get into that, why that is. And I think it reflects well on me, actually. It's not a bad thing that I don't pay attention to contemporary affairs. I'm ultimately a hedgehog, not a fox, if you're familiar with Isaiah Berlin's book of that title. But we'll get into that eventually. Anyway, when 9/11 happened, it was very interesting because I had been reading all these Arabic and Greek texts that were written in chronicles about this arcane battle that nobody heard of. And all of a sudden I find Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri talking about the same sorts of things, the same themes, the same verbatim quotes that I had read that I assume nobody even knows about. And that was really my initial interest in getting into this entire field. I went from being into the history, which I always liked and still do, but then finding the sort of continuity and the relevance that was happening in the now, at least amongst Muslims, and at the same time seeing the absolute lack of continuity in the West, which is the ultimate confusion, which one can talk about. But before I go any further, this is about the Battle of Yarmuk after all, so let's talk a little bit about the battle so I can familiarize you with it. And before I forget, I was talking to you about Victor Davis Hanson, and a lot of people get a kick out of this. I just found this picture recently somewhere, and it's basically, there you go. So that's back at the time when I was working on the Battle of Yarmuk. As you can see, I look even more of a thug then than I do now. And there he is. That's that's his farm, and this is probably 99, maybe 2000. And he would often have little get-togethers for a select few students. So there's that. That's a little amusing picture that I think people get a kick out of. But anyway, so let me read to you about the Battle of Yarmuk. So August 20 is the final day of the battle, which is tomorrow. It goes on for 6 days. It happens, according to the Islamic tradition, Muhammad, and we'll be getting into Muhammad very soon. Excuse me. Dies in 632, and then 634, the Arabs under Abu Bakr first, and then Omar, the Caliph, are now spearheaded and going into Greater Syria, which is a Christian region at the time. And there's mass deportations and massacres, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius musters a massive army of 30,000 men, according to the sources, and they go and confront the Arabs, who are apparently about a little less, 24,000 fighters on horseback and camels. And they meet somewhere at the Yarmouk River in Syria. Now, I'm going to read to you a little quote between the leader of the Byzantines, Vahan, an Armenian, and Khalid bin al-Walid, or is it Al-Walid, the sword of Allah, which is basically, he was one of the generals and a very important general at this time. And now pay attention to these quotes, because this is what I was reading as a student in college. And then I'll show you again how this became relevant to, the contemporary question. So when they met, they tried to parlay, Khalid and Vahan. And Vahan, the general, told him, look, we're going to give you money. We'll give you people what you need, the Arab invaders, take it and go back to Arabia. And then Khalid responded, quote, it was not hunger that brought us here, but we Arabs are in the habit of drinking blood. And we are told the blood of the Romans or the Byzantines is the sweetest of its kind. So we came to shed your blood and drink it. All right. Keep that in mind, because this is going to be a relevant quote. And then, they keep parlaying, and then supposedly, so here's a little good quote I also like. And this is from Arabic sources, which is very interesting because it, in a way, sometimes makes the Arabs look bad. So Vahan, after being told the whole blood drinking thing, his diplomatic mask dropped. He doesn't want to give them money anymore so they can leave. And he says to Khalid, quote, "So we thought you came seeking what your brethren always sought, money, extortion. But alas, we were wrong. You came killing men, enslaving women, plundering wealth, destroying buildings. Better people had tried to do the same, but always ended up defeated. As for you, there is no lower and more despicable people, wretched, impoverished Bedouins. All we ask is that you leave our lands, but if you refuse, we will annihilate you." Khalid reportedly goes on to telling him to embrace Islam and you'll be fine. So Khalid says, quote, "If you refuse Islam, there can only be war between us, and you will face men who love death as you love life." Remember that quote too. And Vahan basically said, "Do what you want. We're never going to leave our religion of Christianity or pay you jizya. It's war." Okay. So negotiations were over. And then right before it, and these, keep in mind, this is a massive story, by the way. And like I told you, I wrote a whole thesis about it, which was like 80 pages. And it's also chapter 1 of my sword and scimitar. Okay. Let me put this picture away. VDH. All right. So there's a lot more details. I'm just giving you some of the more relevant points that I want to make and raise today. So right before the battle and after the negotiations, a large group of more Muslim fighters appear, and they have with them Christian captives. And right in front of the Christian army, they hold them. Think of the ISIS videos, and they stand behind them and they knock them over, pull their head back, and start sawing it off. Okay. Again, and that's in the Muslim sources. And then right on the eve of the first day of battle, let me quote you a Muslim historian, A.I. Akram. He says, the quote, "Muslims spent the night in prayer and recitation of the Quran and reminded each other of the two blessings that awaited them, either victory in life or martyrdom and paradise." And this is what I call the win-win scenario of Islam, which is once you engage in the jihad, if you fight and kill and plunder and steal and rape and aggrandize yourself, you win. And if you die, well, you go to heaven and get more wealth and women in paradise. And it's actually being noted here by Islamic sources. All right. And at the same time, the Islamic sources, this is interesting, they have the Christian Vahan, the general, trying to exhort his men for the upcoming battle and saying, quote, "These Arabs who stand before you seek to enslave your children and women." So the Christians are fighting for something else, excuse me. And another Christian general warned the Byzantine army to fight hard, or else, quote, "The Arabs shall conquer your lands and ravish your women." And these fears were not unwarranted because, again, according to the sources, Arab general Abu Sufyan was at the same time prancing on his war steed, waving his spear and exhorting the Muslims to, quote, "Jihad in the way of Allah, jihad fi sabilillah," so that you might seize the Christians' lands and cities and enslave their children and women. A lot of familiar motifs, right? So the battle lasts 6 days, and finally on the day that it ends, August 20th, there's a massive dust storm, which is something the Arabs are accustomed to, their opponents less so. And that finally really tipped the scale in to the advantage of the Arabs and caused mass chaos, where even though the Roman infantry's numbers proved for nothing. And what was even worse, they were in the Yarmmuk Valley, there's these ravines and precipices, and now darkness fell. And then, in the words of one historian, I have his name in the doc. I always give quotes, and they're always in my books. So if you want to know the page number, the source, the citation, they're there. But he writes, quote, "As night fell, the terrain echoed with the terrifying din of Muslim shouts and battle cries. Shadows suddenly changed into blades that penetrated flesh. The winds brought the cries of comrades as the enemy stealthily penetrated the ranks among the infernal noise of cymbals, drums, and battle cries and cries of Allahu Akbar. It must have been even more terrifying because they had not expected the Muslims to attack by day." And then it got to the point, it was just mass chaos. And I told you it was a very tight area. And the Muslims with their hooves started pushing and knocking down the Christians down the precipices. And supposedly some of them were even chained together to make a final stand. And it all dragged them down. And in the end, the Byzantine army, this is a quote now, "which Heraclius had spent a year of immense exertion to collect, had entirely ceased to exist," writes British Lieutenant General and historian John Bagot Glubb. There was no withdrawal, he continues, no rear guard action, no nucleus of survivors. There was nothing left. Now, what makes this battle so important? Because this is the battle that essentially was sort of like the first domino, and all the other dominoes collapsed soon after it. After the Battle of Yarmuk in Syria in 636, all resistance essentially more or less collapsed. I mean, there were pockets of resistance, but before you knew it, all of Syria was conquered, all of Egypt. These are, again, keep in mind, these are the main Christian regions of the world, the oldest. Okay, and they're part of the Eastern Roman Empire. I think at the time, of course, you have the the post Chalcedon 451. There's the rift between the so-called monophysites or miaphysites and the other side. So there's that conflict too, which wasn't helping. But anyway, after the Battle of Yarmuk, essentially 4,000 square miles of territory from the Middle East all the way to Morocco. So giving them their modern names, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and then later Spain, and of course the Middle East. When I say greater Syria, as it was known, that includes all the modern nations today of Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, massive parts of Iraq were actually more Christian than they were Persian, the Sasanian Empire, which also was being conquered around the same time. Here's a nice quote from Hilaire Belloc, a historian that I do like because he's very prescient. He writes of this time and of these battles, quote, "Such a revolution had never been. No earlier attack had been so sudden, so violent, or so permanently successful. Within a score of years from the first assault in 634, he's talking about the Battle of Ajnadain, which is 2 years before Yarmuk and also important, the Christian Levant had gone. Syria, the cradle of the faith, and Egypt with Alexandria, the mighty Christian sea, were gone forever." Okay, and you even get from the time Christian monks who talk about the Battle of Yarmuk. So one of them is Anastasios of Sinai, who I believe is living in the 7th century, and he was alive when Egypt was being overrun soon after Yarmuk. And he writes of Yarmuk, he calls Yarmuk, quote, "the first terrible and incurable fall of the Roman army. I am speaking of the bloodshed at Yarmuk, after which occurred the capture and burning of the cities of Palestine, even Caesarea and Jerusalem. After the destruction of Egypt, there followed the enslavement and incurable devastation of the Mediterranean lands and islands." And so that's the point. Decades after the Battle of Yarmuk, this very pivotal battle, all the territory that I just told you, the older, richer, more sophisticated region that nobody today even thinks was ever Christian. Okay. Armenia was conquered a little after this time, and then parts of it was liberated and parts of it was absorbed. And then the Turks come, of course, and Asia Minor gets taken, and Spain, like I told you. But here's a quote from Thomas Madden, Crusades historian. He writes that, quote, "Muslim armies conquered 3/4 of the Christian world." And he's referring to, what happened after the Battle of Yarmuk, which is what opened the floodgates, but also later on, the different iterations, like the Seljuk and Ottoman Turks especially. Now, what's also interesting is, these Arab conquests, unlike, in Europe during the so-called Dark Ages, in the fall of Rome, you had the Germanic peoples flooding in. But the difference that's very important, I think, is that the Germanic barbarians, they assimilated into the pre-existing culture and religion. They became Christian. I mean, some were Arians, but later on that sorted itself out. But they became Christian. Their language was, assimilated with Latin largely. In the East, the same thing sort of happened. The Russians took on the Greek and became Christian and took on the Greek script for their language. But it's very different with what Islam did, because Islam came with a creed and an ideology. It wasn't just another conqueror that got absorbed in the Christian lands of North Africa and the Middle East. It was one that fundamentally changed them. It Arabized them. And so today, the Arabs come from the Arabian Peninsula, the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. But today they say there's 22 Arab nations. None of them were Arabic. They're Arab because they speak Arabic, because their languages were snuffed out largely, and because they were Islamized, oftentimes forcibly. Okay, so that is the profound impact. So here's the quote that I was going to give you. It's by a really good historian. he's an older historian. I only quote older historians because they're the only legit ones at this point. Okay. Most of I have this rule, maybe I'll talk about it, what I read and what I allow my eyes to fall upon. And I try not to read any book written before like 1940. Okay, but I do sometimes anyway. But here's a historian, Francesco Gabrieli, and he writes, quote, "The Battle of Yarmuk had without doubt more important consequences than almost any other in all world history." Now that's saying a lot, okay? But as you can see, there's a reason for that, all right? Now, the final point, which is sort of going to, bring us back to what I was telling you when I was in college and then 9/11 happened and why it is that, I started, sort of like my eyes kind of were open to the real issue that's going on, which is one of continuity, is that if you recall, I'm going to read you some of the quotes that I just read to you about the exchange between Vahan, the Roman or Armenian Christian general, and Khalid, the sword of Allah, the general of the Muslims. So you remember he said, Khalid said, he said about the Roman blood tastes best. He said, "We love life, we love death as you love life." He said, "We are here to break your crosses," etc., etc. These are all things that Muslim jihadist groups are saying till this very day, including ISIS. ISIS is on record. They've said things like, quote, "American blood tastes best and we will taste it soon." And they've said, "We love death as you love life." They said, "We will break your crosses and enslave your women." Nobody knows that they're actually quoting verbatim all of these stories that come from their historiographical tradition. Okay. And they just, I even, when I first, this is what I'm trying to tell you, when I read Khalid bin Walid saying this stuff, it was okay. It was whatever. Then I found the writings of Al Qaeda. Long story short, when I was at the Library of Congress, I worked there for a while, and I should probably talk about that because it's relevant. But when I was at the Library of Congress, and I found that's on the origin of my first book, The Al Qaeda Reader. I came across the writings of Al Qaeda written in Arabic, and they weren't directed to Westerners, which the media was always happy to disseminate. The ones directed to the West were very all about you attacked us, we're attacking you as payback. It's self-defense. The ones that were to Muslims were more like this. It was all about, no, the Americans are infidels. We have to hate them no matter what they do. It's not about grievances. And then they would quote things like, we taste their blood and we love death as you love life and that sort of thing. So to me, it's always been that sort of continuity that really got to me. And other things just to be cognizant of, ISIS's black flag, that's actually patterned after the sword of Allah, Khalid bin Walid's or Walid's black flag as well. And in the account, I didn't quote it, but it's in the book, in Sword and Scimitar, especially where, they talk about Muslims dying at the Battle of Yarmuk and the Ain Hor, these celestial, big bosomed, supernatural women who are created to, pleasure the jihadist martyr who dies in perpetuity, appear to them. And ISIS till this very day and other jihadist groups talk about how, the suicide bomber gets to enjoy the embraces and so forth. And finally, the choreographed slaughter of, Christians and others. The most famous is the 21 Coptic Christians, or 20 Copts and one African, where they stand behind them and they knock them down and cut their heads off. That is intentionally choreographed and followed by what happened. If you recall, I talked about right before the battle, where thousands of Muslims brought Christian captives and beheaded them. Okay, so all of that is important to keep in mind. That is the Battle of Yarmuk. That's its relevance to this day, and that's how it changed history. Now, going back to how it changed the course of my history as well, I was talking to you. So after I wrote the MA, and I graduated from Fresno State, I applied to Georgetown University, the Center of Contemporary Arab Studies. And this is when I was very naive and I don't know anything about how politicized academia is. And I think I'm going to go there and just do research and it'll be appreciated. And of course it wasn't. And I still didn't get it. But anyway, I eventually dropped out, but I got a job at the Library of Congress working in the Near Eastern division. And I was like a little kid in the playground because I'm, a bibliophile, and that's all the books practically in the world are housed in the Library of Congress. I was in the Jefferson building, beautiful building. And I already told you about how I found the Al Qaeda Reader, the writings from Al Qaeda. But at the same time, because I was always interested in military history, I continued doing my research, and I continued following up and getting a lot of sources that would be hard to find otherwise about battles. And that is actually all that culminated into Sword and Scimitar, which came out in 2018. So that's why I often say I've been working on this book for actually over 20 years, not writing it, but the research and the actual interest in it. Okay. And again, what I found interesting, and the whole point of all of this history that I do is, is again to show the continuity. I'm less interested in arguing, Islam says, the Quran says X, Y, and Z, and therefore Muslims are doing it. I have no problem with that. I'm just saying I like it more when we can find his history that actually validates action. I think that's more compelling. And that's what I've been finding, and that's sort of been what I've been doing. That's kind of been my journey, thanks to the Battle of Yarmuk. So as you can see, sorry, I'm just looking at something here. Yeah. So anyway, that's it. That's the Battle of Yarmuk, which occurs tomorrow. That's why it's the most consequential battle in world history, and that's also why it was very consequential in molding me and setting me on the course that I've been in, which is continuing to write about history, especially battles and conflict between Islam and the West, and demonstrating all sorts of continuity, which is obviously very important. And what else here? All right. And okay, before I leave, or I'm going to look at your questions, but I did want to say, in case you're not aware, I have a debate coming up with Jay Smith in 2 days. And it's about the question of Muhammad. And actually, everything that I discussed today, including the Battle of Yarmuk, is very relevant. And so hopefully I'll remember. And if I don't, maybe one of you can comment and remind me, because there's a very important point I'd like to make about the Battle of Yarmuk and everything we discussed today, and what the nomos would have us believe. The nomos are those who say, no, Muhammad didn't exist. I like abbreviations. Nothing derogatory about it. And if you do plan on joining me and joining the debate, and I hope you do, check it out on my channel and make comments. I'll be reading them. But if you do want to, I suggest you watch my other videos that I made right before that started this whole debate. I made 2 videos. One is called, I think, Why I Believe in Muhammad, and the other one is called Why Muslims Laugh at Claims that Muhammad didn't exist. And they're really the same video. I made them on the same day, but I separated them. But if you want to watch those, those are a good primer to help prepare you for what's coming up. All right, let's see what's going on here. Now, I see this thing scrolling with lots of people, and I'm going to, let's see, try to figure out. So I'm going to take some questions here, I think. And it's so hard to read. Be patient. Bear with me. This stuff is very strange. All right, let's see. Okay, so super chats, eh? Where are they? All right, I'm gonna scroll up here and and thanks for all the excuse me, the money. I think that's the super chat. Bravo, Ray, make history honest again. Yeah, thanks. When was the last time a Muslim nation beat a non-Muslim nation at war? Allah seems to have run out of steam. They lose all wars. Yeah, but the bigger question is, why are their enemies or their historic enemies letting them win? All right, Carolyn, currently reading Sword and Scimitar. I can't recommend it enough. May God bless you and give your work the attention it deserves. Thank you. God bless you. Dan Dave, Sassanid Byzantine War really exhausted the 2 empires. Assassination of Khosrow also crumbled Iran. Iranians beat Arabs at the battle, paid the price. Yeah. The Battle of Yarmuk, one of the big questions, of course, is why were they so successful? Not just the Battle of Yarmuk, but all the conquests, all the battles. This is one of history's supposed, mysteries, how these weak Arabs from the desert beat 2 empires, the Sassanians, the Persians, and the Byzantine, and took over all that land. And, the modern day historians will give you all sorts of, and that in my thesis, actually, that's what I spent a lot of time on. It was kind of boring, the whole historiographical interpretations, and they'll give you all sorts of secular, materialistic reasons: the desiccation of Arabia, the weakening of the two empires, which is of course legit. But the actual, if you dig in, and that's what I love to do, dig into the primary sources, the Muslim, of course, account is Allah is on our side, and see, this is proof positive that jihad gives us good stuff. We win. And surprisingly, the Christians was somewhat similar. It was God was against us because we have sinned, and he's raised up Amalek in the guise of Islam or the Saracens to punish us. And I think there's I think I have a very holistic view as to all of those reasons combined to make sense. David the Goliath, Middle East was once part of the West before it was destroyed by Islam. Even many Roman emperors had origins in modern Middle East. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing, the Middle East, the Egypt, Syria, Turkey, these were actually fundamental to the West. And yet when you go to, when you're in high school and you look at these textbooks, it's almost like they were always separate. They had nothing to do, as if they were always destined to be Muslim. No, I mean, this is there were five major centers of Christendom. Only one was in the West, Rome. The rest, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, and later Constantinople, which was also conquered, were all in the East. All the great church fathers and the theologians and the catechal school of Alexandria, all in the East. So, but I think that's why people don't know this, because they don't want you to know that Islam exists over borrowed, that is conquered land. Okay. I'm a Sardinian guy. Hi. This is Collapse. Unfortunately, not yet a historian, but I've been studying the ethnic persecution of Sardinians and the 1017 crusade against Mujahid al-Amiri, led by okay, cool. Keep it up. History is such an important, I think history is downplayed and people are taught that it doesn't matter and it's just whatever, but there's a reason for that. It's actually the most important thing you can learn. I just came across a really important quote by George Orwell, 1984, something about if you want to destroy a people, destroy their history first. Yeah. Aside from the proto-crusade, collapse, the persecution. Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. Thank you for all the super chats. Love the real history in your books and videos. This is from that other guy, especially the fact that you quote sources. Keep up the great work. Thank you. Robert Johnson, I can't wait for your next book. Yeah, me too. And thanks for the super chat. The Two Swords of Christ. That's a big one. I've been working on that for over a year now. It's what I call the third of my trilogy, following Sword and Scimitar and Defenders of the West. And it's definitely going to be the most graphic. So, prepare yourself, because what you have is the most wild and ferocious Christian fighters, the Knights of the Temple and the Hospital, versus the implacable forces of Islam. So as you can imagine, it gets really graphic. Jolene Antrim, love the information you put out. Have you ever read the history of the where's my glasses? All right. No, I haven't read that. Thanks. Rogue disciple, any advice for someone who wants to be a scholar of Christian Islamic history? Well, it's definitely a great and important field, but if you want to do it professionally, academically, and be part of the group as an academic, my experience says it's not and that's why I never finished my PhD. I didn't need it at that point, and I also knew I was out of the club for the stuff that I had said. So unfortunately, there's some constraints if you're going to be part of academia and try to be a historian, unless of course you get tenure. At that point, I guess it doesn't matter, but you won't be invited to any cocktail parties. All right, Don. Hi, Don. First super chat for me, but as you know, I always use the thanks button on your videos. We all need you to help get you more looks. Okay, thank you. Again, I'm still new. If I missed anybody, and I probably did. Oh, there's this live thing. Okay, live. Hi, we're the Arabs. I'm just gonna scroll through this real quick because we're gonna wrap it up. This is, like I said, my first live stream, and I'm just trying to familiarize myself. So thank you for being patient. And but we'll be doing this again. Let me know what you think. I was thinking of doing one of these once a week, maybe having a Q&A, kind of like a summary of the week or something to that effect. But yeah, let's see, what time is it? It's a little after 2. Hey, done a whole half hour. I'm happy with that. Okay. So thank you all for joining me. And thanks for the comments. I'll be looking at all of them eventually. And the super chats. I appreciate it. And I will see you again soon. Bye.